Hi, my name's Kirsty Mackay and I'm the founder of the Book Dragon. And today I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing author Rachel Bonner. Hello, Rachel, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kirsty. It's good to be with you.
Brilliant. I wanted to start off by just asking you if you could just give us a little bit more detail about yourself as an author and where you're actually from, where you're based, where did you write
Well,
in?
I'm based in Lancashire,
Mhm.
um, out in the countryside. So we have some beautiful views and walks around us, which I really enjoy. As for my writing, well, at the moment I've got the one series out, which is the Choices and Consequences series,
Mhm.
which is a 4-book fantasy and romance series. I'm definitely working on other books, but writing and being an author isn't my main job, so it has to kind of take a back seat to my day job.
Okay. And have you always wanted to write though? Is this kind of your sort of main passion? If we could wave a magic wand and you could, you could be supported because I know a lot of people when they start off with it's that financial struggle, isn't it, to become a full-time writer? Is that an aspiration of yours?
I think it's something that if it happened, I would love it and I would really enjoy it. But I also very much enjoy my day job, so I'm actually fine with that. No, I didn't always intend to be a writer. This story developed in my head and I decided I needed to write it down to get it out of my head. And things just developed from there.
Okay. So how did that story start? What did you have any particular inspiration that came behind it, or is this something that's been sitting there for a while that you thought now was the time to get it out and onto the written, the page, the writing on the pages, and get that released to people? Did someone sort of encourage you to write that book?
Well, I think mostly I had the story, at least to the extent that it's in the first book, in my head, and I knew how it would end, and I didn't really know what was happening in between. So I started writing the first book to get it out of my head,
Mm.
and as I did that, I learned more about what was going to happen. I find the characters have lives of their own, and they start telling you what they want you to write about. Having written it all down, I shared it with some of my family and close friends, and they were, do you know what, this is perhaps worth going a step further with. So I thought about publishing it. I got it properly edited, got covers made, and decided that I would self-publish it. And having published the first one, well, I needed to go on and write the second, third, and fourth ones and publish them all in due course as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. So you've obviously really enjoyed doing the writing as well, and it's nice to know as well that you're looking at experimenting in different genres. Is there another genre you're particularly interested in having a go at writing something, or have you got a story in mind?
It's not so much the genre as the story, and it's whatever genre works for the story.
Hmm.
When I first started writing the Choices and Consequences series, I thought it was going to be much higher fantasy. There were going to be much more fantastical elements, but that's not really how it worked out. Um, I think anything I wrote, it would be about writing the story, and then that would be the genre it went for. So I've got no objections to writing any particular genre. It's just how it works. But I do love fantasy and romance. And so that's probably where my books will end up being.
Yeah. Do you read a lot in that particular area as well? Do you take inspiration from some of the other books that you read?
I do. I read quite a lot of fantasy. I read a lot of romance, but I also read quite a lot of contemporary and
Hmm.
historical works as well. And I've not really felt inclined to write in those areas.
Okay. So moving on then, let's have a look at your work and books that you've written. Can you just give us a overview of those titles and a brief sort of synopsis of what they're about?
Well, given that there are 4 books, and I think together they reach to over 1,000 pages, I'm not sure a brief synopsis is possible. But basically, there are 2 key protagonists.
Hmm.
They're set in our world, but way in the future. There's been a time of devastation and the world is redeveloping, and in some areas it's at far more medieval levels than we are today. In some areas it's still nearly as technological as we are today. But as the world redeveloped, some people developed the ability to do different things with their minds, things like telepathy and telekinesis. And that was just so that I could change one of the parameters of our world and see what impacts that was. And this is about two characters who start to come together. They start to fall in love, but really for both of them, there are extreme barriers and things stopping them. There are so many reasons why they should not fall in love, why they should not be together. And the books are about them exploring what those barriers are. In the first book, one of them comes to the conclusion that the barriers can be removed and the other doesn't. During the second book, they both actually come together and start a relationship, but that we then discover that there are a whole number of things going on behind the scenes that we didn't realize, and it's going to be way more complicated. But in the second book, they do marry, and the third and fourth books involve them as a married couple, resolving many of the issues from their past, some of which they knew about and were trying to avoid, some of which they didn't know about and are now discovering. And in fact, their actions in the end change the way the world works. And so it's about taking responsibility for that as well.
Brilliant. That's a great summary, considering you've got four quite detailed books out. Are you is that where the series ending at the four now, or is there anything that you sort of planned in that with the same characters, or have you let them go now?
Well, certainly that series, the story of those people is complete. There are a number of minor characters, or even not so minor characters within the books, who have a lot of scope for other stories. There is available as an ebook only a short story, which is set earlier than these books, and that's available to anyone who subscribes to my newsletter. That's called Trader's Child, and it's about part of the early life of one of the protagonists. But I also have a number of short stories that I'm developing that are about characters that are mentioned or exist in the books. There's an awful lot of scope for further writing when I get to it. But in fact, the main book that I'm writing at the moment, and I have several projects on at once, is about a different set of characters altogether, a different world.
Okay. And your current books, obviously you said, you mentioned earlier about the enjoyment that you have of developing these characters and sort of testing them in different circumstances, situations, if you introduce certain elements to it. The two main characters in your book, what is it about them you especially love? What really sort of draws them to you?
I think that they're flawed. They've both got problems, things they haven't faced up to. They're not perfect and they have to deal with that.
Brilliant. And I think a lot of writers, they can make their characters too perfect. And I think when you do introduce some flaws as well and some negative sort of personality traits, it does make them feel more tangible and more realistic. Do you feel that way?
I would agree definitely with that, yes.
Yeah. The stories that you seem to have a lot of ideas, and you're kind of one of those writers that I think you start different things sort of starting and not quite finishing. It's working where you put your attention to next. Where would the inspiration come from? Do you take that from surroundings, or is there other sort of tools that you use to take your inspiration from for your stories?
It can come from absolutely anything. It'll be something someone says and I think, oh, that would make an interesting story if I developed in this way. It can be something I see. It's a very common question, where do your ideas come from? And I I think, well, somebody asked me, where do your ideas come from? They can come from anywhere. But hang on, this gives me an idea. Ooh, how about a little shop, a little magic shop that sells ideas to authors? And there I've started the idea of a new story.
Yeah, that's great. It's quite an interesting story. That one would
Yeah,
make,
I haven't
wouldn't
written
it?
that one, but I think that one could be quite interesting.
Okay. And your writing journey. So thinking back to when you started to write your very first book, what did you find was the biggest challenge for you as a writer, and how did you overcome that?
That's a really good question. The first book was published back in 2018, and indie publishing has been becoming more and more of a thing. But even that recently, there were perhaps some stigmas with self-publishing. And so I did try a traditional route, and I didn't really get anywhere. And there's a lot of really good reasons for that. It's cross-genre, which is not popular with traditional publishers. They like to know what they're getting, and it likes to be they like it narrow. And that's fair enough, because they've got to make a profit. So I decided to try self-publishing, and I think probably the biggest challenge then is everything you have to learn for that. Once you've learned it for one book, it becomes much easier to apply it for future books. And then once you've published your book, I think the biggest challenge is definitely marketing. And I think there are plenty of indie authors who would say that. And it's really important, if you're publishing your own book, professional editing, professional covers, but then actually getting out there and marketing it and being able to get value for your marketing money, that's a real challenge, especially if you're doing it in many ways as a hobby.
Yeah. What would be your biggest piece of advice for somebody who is very new to writing and just about to set off on their first manuscript? What would be the key thing that you would think they'd need to
Sit
set
down and write it, get words on the page. Once you've done that, it can be edited. You can change it, but get your words on the page.
Brilliant. That's really good. I know I've learned quite a bit just through the interview as well. Is there something that, you know, when you're writing, when you've obviously you've got your full-time job which you enjoy doing, and then you've got your writing as a hobby. Do you get any sort of downtime from both, and what sort of things do you like to do?
I like reading. I like walking. We have beautiful countryside for walking. I also enjoy cross stitch. So I've got quite a few different hobbies.
For you to sort of
Oh
relax.
yes.
Do you find that some story inspiration comes when you're doing other things as well, doing sort of
Oh
the
yes,
creative elements?
particularly walking.
Yeah. And I assume because you've got lovely views around there that you do take a lot of inspiration from some of the landscapes and things that you would.
Oh yes, some of the landscapes, particularly landscapes that we've come across in our walks, are in fact reflected in the books.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, I've really enjoyed this interview with you, Rachel, and finding a little bit more about your work. And thank you as well for sharing your experience and the advice to those that are watching, and people who want to start writing a book and yet haven't just made that first leap. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, and I've enjoyed it.
I look forward to catching up with you again shortly. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.